Hi there. Welcome to Unmuted Voices, where we dive into the real stories behind why we stay silent, how we reclaim our voice, and what it truly means to speak with confidence. I'm Aisha, founder and chief communication coach at Start in the Beginning and a longtime market research executive. I've spent years helping people and companies find their voice, and even now, I'm still learning to use mine more boldly. I'm so glad you're here. Today's episode is about the communication tools we should have learned sooner. Our goal is to share practical communication tools that professionals often lack, sometimes when first starting out, and in other cases, may still lack. We also want to bust some myths around confidence and clarity, how that shows up, and what it actually means. Today's guest is absolutely perfect for this discussion. He is an absolute rock star, and I'm also proud to say a longtime friend, Mike Finnegan. Mike has held strategy and chief of staff roles since joining Vanguard in 2018. Currently, he is CFO for Vanguard Americas, where he is responsible for corporate financial services in Canada and Latin America. He is also Vanguard International's head of strategy, where he advises on Vanguard's business investments outside the US. Prior to Vanguard, he held roles ranging from strategy analysis to risk mitigation at Target Corporation and Independence Blue Cross. Mike earned his BA in philosophy from the University of New Hampshire and an MS in applied intelligence from Mercyhurst University. He is an Irish citizen, grew up in the US, and has lived in the UK for the past 5 years with his wife, three kids, and bouncy black lab. Welcome to Unmuted Voices, Mike.
Thanks so much, Aisha. Happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us. I'm so excited to have you on today for so many reasons. Number one, I've known you for many years, and in that time, I've admired not just your courage, but how you show up in rooms, how you communicate, and how you always make people around you feel like valued contributors. Just as a little tidbit, Mike and I worked together at Independence Blue Cross for several years. And in that time, when I tell you not once did I ever notice any way in which Mike had ever made any team member feel like less of a rock star. And so he is a true leader. And that's part of this project is bringing on people who have fought really hard for their careers and along the way have held a certain level of empathy and a certain level of humanity. And all of that has been grounded in how they communicate verbally and non-verbally with the people around them. So let's take a little bit of a step back, Mike. Tell us a bit about your background because I find it really fascinating. We used to have really insightful conversations about life and legacy and what it means. How did you grow up?
Yeah, well, first off, thank you for that incredible introduction. It's certainly a varied path that I've been on, but definitely appreciate all those kind words and can echo all of those right back at you in terms of how you make people feel. And certainly, that's a background for why you and I get along so well as friends. In terms of, my background and how I grew up, very much so a blue collar family in Northwest New Jersey. The small part of northern New Jersey, why it's called the Garden State. My dad was a carpenter. My mom was a little bit of an entrepreneur. She kind of babysat, she worked retail, she did lots of things. But hard work and work ethic were certainly, right in the forefront of what I grew up around. So was providing for your family and opening doors and creating opportunities. And so a lot of what I watched my parents do was make a lot of sacrifices so that me and my siblings could actually pursue things that we like to do, whether that be music or sport or even education. And so that was very much so the world that I grew up in. Um, in terms of how that's kind of translated, I think, to the path that I'm on, is I kind of always just go after the opportunities that are in front of me that intrigue me. And so, having just listened to you play back my career, it has been a varied path in terms of I did some national security contracting for a little bit. Then I worked in consumer retail. Then I worked in healthcare. Now I'm in financial services. And for me, it's really been chasing not just the opportunity to provide for my own family now, but also the opportunity to really dig into interesting, complex topics that ultimately better the outcomes for other people longer term. I think in every stop along the way that I've had, there's kind of been a mission orientation to the work that I'm doing. Vanguard famously is owned by its shareholders, and so that's where I've had that. When I was at Independence Blue Cross, it was about bettering the health outcomes for Southeastern Pennsylvanians. Even at Target, publicly held company, but very much so holds their customers as guests and wants to improve their day to day. And so, I think for me, tying that back to where I came from, I think my parents also, in their hard work, kind of always saw a broader community impact that I think they wanted to drive, whether that was through church involvement, whether that was through starting a roller hockey league for kids to play in who didn't have access to it, all of those type of things that they were able to do, I think has kind of been a common thread that I've learned from and tried to pull into my own life.
I love that, Mike. Thank you for sharing. That is an incredible legacy to be pushing forward. I can imagine there's sort of some weight that comes with that, but at the same time, being able to carry that weight gracefully and then pass it on to your three kids, as you've mentioned, must be just such an enriching journey for you. So, I want to dive in a little bit into how all of these varied experiences in your career, and I'm learning new things about you as well, which is fantastic. All of these varied experiences in your career have probably made you a much, much richer professional, right? Regardless of what industry you're in, you're pulling knowledge and insights from, various walks of life, various ways of looking at what, impacts an individual's life. But it took a while to get here, right? It hasn't been an easy road, and that's one of the things that I'd love to impart on our listeners. Everything is a journey, so let's take a little bit of a step back, right? And we leap forward in time from where you grew up, and we go to when you first started your career. Can you share a story from early in your career where you felt I may not have all the tools I need from a communication perspective, so, you might have had a lack of communication tools and they may have created some challenges. Can you talk a little bit about something like that that may have happened to you and what you learned that still lingers with you today?
Yeah. So I was fortunate where the first manager that hired me into corporate America, it was my first role at Target Corporation, is actually still a mentor of mine today, and he's somebody who I still stay in touch with, and he is a master of communication in pretty much any medium. But in terms of in room, in person communication, he's somebody who right away I saw drive an impact in a room and coming in fresh out of school, trying to figure out what is my value in this big, massive organization. I really watched him to try to emulate a bit of those habits and routines that he brought to a meeting. Um, I also then, would ask him pretty point blank questions of, how I was doing when I finally got the mic or was able to deliver some insights or analysis. And one of the things I really appreciate that he brought to light for me in the early moments was not just communication around the words that I was using, but truly
Mm,
some of those nonverbals of the confidence of my posture or the openness of my posture when we're in a bit of a thought storming type of a discussion. Um, those were things that I think I got the benefit of hearing that feedback, learning and seeing how it can be useful and instructive in like my very early moments of coming into a corporate career. And I think it's something that I've held as I've rotated roles within an organization or have changed organizations because at the end of the day, I asked my 11-year-old this morning, what's good communication? How would you describe that? As he was walking out the door to school. And he said, I think it's really just like, how do you get thoughts from your head into somebody else's in a clear way? And I thought, I think he's just nailed what good communication is. But how you
Mhm.
do that, that's the tough part, right? And
Right.
I think when you are going through kind of a journey of a new environment, a new team, new personalities, you want to be able to bring those objective and clear questions that you want to bring to an organization in a way that doesn't ruffle feathers, but provoke the conversation in a way that doesn't push back on how things have been done, but advances thought forward, into a place of progress. And so I think staying mindful of those kind of nonverbal elements of communication is incredibly important, and still the foundation of words matter, and
Mm.
how you structure that communication is still the foundational element.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that your 11-year-old is already so wise, because that's a big gap, right? That gap between, and I'm signaling between my brain and my mouth, there's like 4 inches there, 3 or 4 inches there, but it's probably one of the biggest gaps that we have, trying to get a coherent thought, saying what you meaning what you say. Those things can be very, very, very different things. That's probably one of my favorite Khalil Gibran quotes, right? Between what is said and what is meant, and what is meant, but what is said, much love is lost. There's so much that happens in that translation, and he's absolutely right. I want to double click on something that you said, which is really interesting. I think a lot of people take for granted what terms like confidence in your posture and openness in your posture. What does that mean? How do you emulate that? It's really difficult to probably explain that physically, but if you could, how would you coach somebody on how to be open with your posture and confident with your posture?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's certainly ways to go formally learn about this, right? I think, there are lots of FBI interview techniques, or different investigators who have, written a lot of books and shared a lot of thinking on, signs of a body's space, and how you might be showing openness to something, or fearfulness of something, or hesitation. Um, I have read some of that. It's interesting just because it's, kind of the science of the brain, if you will. But I think for me, it's really just around kind of that line between where are you trying to be comfortable, authentic, and open, and where are you trying to be decisive, bold, and directive. I think for me, there's a spectrum there of kind of what is my objective in the conversation in the dialogue that I'm trying to open. And depending on what my objective is on that spectrum, that's how I'm going to try and bring myself physically to the table. On one end, you want to be you want to be perceived as comfortable and relaxed. And so that might mean sitting back a little bit more, inviting space and other voices into the conversation physically by kind of pulling yourself back and opening that up. And then in others, it's the moment to lean in, right? Or to be kind of the viewpoint in the discussion. And to me, that's the physical presence spectrum that I try to keep in mind, um, depending on what I want to convey.
Yeah, that's a powerful distinction, right? It's not bull in a china shop, show up exactly the same way all of the time. Um, that's really interesting. There's sort of like a shape shifting that almost needs to happen in order to prime people for whatever message it is that you're about to impart onto them. I mean, you can do that with your body language, which is extremely powerful. Shout out to that mentor. If you want to name him, you're more than happy to. If not, that's okay as well. But it's absolutely fantastic that he took the time to mentor you and coach you, and now you're imparting that same knowledge on, tons and tons of
Yeah,
people,
no,
which is wonderful.
John Poole, he's a friend and a mentor, and yeah, John is somebody who I always look up to and learn from still to this day.
Shout out to John. All right. Thank you so much for that. So, that seems like a communication tool that more people early in their career really should know. What are some others? You've done leadership and strategy work. Can you think of some other communication tools you wish more professionals learned earlier in their career?
Yeah, so to get a little bit more, I guess, like formal or tactical in it, one that really got crystallized for me in corporate strategy shops is the notion of what's called the pyramid principle. I think maybe McKinsey is the one who's quoted as, kind of owning this principle, but it's used and reproduced everywhere, and it's not that complicated of a principle. Really, it's the notion of starting with your bottom line up front. So the top of your pyramid is that notion of as concise as you can be, what matters, what are we talking about, what is it? And then underneath that, you want to start to structure your communication, whether it's written or verbally being presented, as a way to support that. So breaking down the key elements of the thought into 3 to 5 categories and then kind of defending the position. And so from a written standpoint, it's a really nice way to keep yourself tight because there's all kinds of research that shows, how individuals start reading an email, start reading a memo, start into a deck, and very quickly lose interest, right? Like this is 2025, we're in TikTok, we're in, short video forms. You've got to capture it and keep people all the way through. And so I think that's a very practical, tactical tool that I try to bring to my teams and into my own communication style as I think about, structuring kind of broader messages that we want to share. And I think what's nice about it is it can be for a big communication, but it also can be for a small one, right? It can be for a, hey, I need to sit down with this person and I need them to hear a clear takeaway, and it's this one, and I'm going to lead off with it. I'm not going to bury it somewhere. I'm going to lead so that that's what we walk away with.
Right. Oh, say that a little louder for the people in the back. What is it called?
The pyramid principle.
The pyramid principle. I love that. Yeah, absolutely. How do you know what matters? How do you determine that?
Yeah, well, this is the art of the space between your brain and your mouth that you were just talking about, right? But um, I think at the end of the day, you have to make a call around what is the objective that you're trying to optimize for in anything that you're going to communicate. And so sometimes the objective that we're trying to optimize for is an emotional response. Sometimes it's a clear decision and path forward. Sometimes it's to provoke the next thought, to evolve thinking forward. And I think the more clear you can be in your head on what the objective is that you're trying to optimize for with your messaging, then you can start to stack together the how you're going to do that, right? And so how you convey that message should be in the spirit of what you're trying to achieve.
I love that. Yeah, it's crystal clear. I think one of the missing elements sometimes too, because I remember this earlier in my career, and still to this day, I have to do a double, triple check is what did they ask me for in the first place? Because what matters to me may not be what matters to them. And certainly everything you said about how to think about it, how to present that information is so key, but keeping in mind like what matters to them, the audience, what decision they're trying to make. I'm sure there's been folks that have presented to you and you're like, I'm lost as to like, how does this connect to what I actually asked you for? Right. Yeah, I see you nodding. So thank you for that clarity. I think a lot of times as we ascend in our careers, some of that stuff becomes so second nature. We know how to identify what matters, but thank you for breaking it down like that. That's really, really, really key. All right. So let's talk about a slightly different element here. We often talk about like confidence in communication. You talked about confidence in posture, openness in posture. What's a myth that you often hear related to confidence or communication that you feel needs to be busted?
Yeah, it's interesting. Talking about confidence, there's the famous Vince Lombardi quote of confidence is contagious. And I think that's kind of a pretty prevalent quote that goes through the military, Vince Lombardi, having ties to West Point, et cetera. Um, one of the things that I think people forget is that the second part of that quote is so is lack of confidence. And so I won't call it a myth, but what I'll call it is a little bit of a misinterpreted known around confidence, right? That it's not just about projecting confidence, but it's also knowing when and how to project lack of confidence. And that it's okay to, in the right setting, project a lack of confidence. But again, how do you communicate that? And so, one of the things that I've found very helpful with a team setting is being able to openly and honestly level set when we're not feeling confident about a certain body of work at hand. And we want to invite more opinions, thoughts, voices, perspectives into the conversation. And so to me, it's that subtle forgotten part of the quote, but it's actually incredibly powerful if you can start to hone that and harness it for the benefit of bringing other voices into the conversation, because you're not trying to overly project that confidence, but you're trying to show, hey, it's okay, I'm lacking confidence on this right now, and actually we might all need to, for a minute, acknowledge where we're at, and I think that can be very helpful.
I am nerding out on that concept right now. Genuinely, I am because um I do feel that in most spaces, particularly corporate spaces, but certainly in a lot of other realms of work, there is that like pressure and push to always have the answer, to always, come across really, really confident about everything that you're saying. And the truth is, the human experience, if you're a lifelong learner, is just lack of confidence, like question to question to question. And between that, we have some moments of clarity, but I do, and I don't know if this was your experience. I'd love to hear from you. I definitely felt that pull, also coming from sort of a blue collar background, not being sure what the rules of the game, what the rules of the games are, not necessarily feeling comfortable saying, I don't know, and going through that path of figuring out how to say, I don't know in a way that does not silence your voice or is career limiting can be really challenging. So I love this concept of being okay with having a lack of confidence and level setting. What's your perspective on this? Because I'm not sure that that's natural to a lot of corporate settings. Do you think this has anything to do with sort of your background, growing up sort of blue collar, where people are super honest about, limitations and things like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one I haven't really reflected on, but the immediate thought that's coming to mind right now is, so I grew up playing a lot of different sports, and I played ice hockey, lacrosse, soccer. Uh, I'm assuming the majority of your listener base is US by calling it soccer instead of football, as I sit here in the UK and can feel people staring at me. Um, but I also got cut from a lot of teams, and when I would get cut, I always would kind of ask for the feedback, even as a very young kid, just trying to stay hungry. And sometimes I would get the feedback, and it was, well, you didn't do this drill correctly, or you didn't do that the way we would expect it to be done. And I found myself reflecting on this, like, well, I didn't know. I've never been here before. I've not done that drill before. I didn't understand that's how you guys did this. So how was I supposed to know? And I remember, I was probably 13 years old sharing some of that frustration with my dad. And he said, well, did you ever ask the coach when they said, go do this drill, or did you just try to fumble through it? And I thought, he's right. I didn't ask. And I said, so what do I do? And he said, well, before you go disperse and get into your drill lines and go forward to go, do it, go up to the coach and say, I've not done this before. How do I do it? And I said, okay, fine. So the next tryout, I went up, and I didn't know the coach, from Adam. And, there was a couple of moments where they said, hey, we're going to go do this now. And I skated over or walked over and said, I've not done that. Can you just explain to me what you're looking for? What are your expectations? and it was a night and day experience, and I think for me that was the license to ask and the license to show, hey, I'm not going to fake it here. I'm not going to fake it till I make it. I'm going to go in and ask what the expectation is, and then I'm going to do my best to deliver on that. But at least now I know what I'm trying to deliver on, as opposed to fumble through it. And I think those experiences are kind of foundational and fundamental uh, to how I try to carry myself within a corporate setting. I get thrown into lots of different projects and lots of different businesses that I do not have experience with. Um, so I want to go in and learn as much as I can as quickly as I can. But the first step to doing that is acknowledging what you don't know and not over demonstrating an overconfidence around that, because that's when things get misconstrued, and you don't end up with the best results.
Absolutely. Certainly something I wish I would have learned earlier. I think I went into my career, as I mentioned, not knowing a ton, but wanting to sort of fake it till I made it. I grew up with a single mother. She was extremely strong. She never necessarily, like, out in public, showed fear. She had to be that way, right? Like, as a Black woman raising six children here in America, and so I inherited some of that, like, fearlessness and that I can do anything kind of an attitude. And I didn't always stop to just ask, partially because I didn't think I could. Right? But that's the one of the biggest myths is, like, people would rather you ask the question than waste time on an exercise and then yield results that nobody asked for. And it's a fear that once you overcome can really open up so many doors for you. Thank you for sharing that perspective. I really appreciate it. I think many people will appreciate that commentary around it's okay to ask questions. In fact, it's imperative, it's incumbent upon you to ask questions, and it's okay to lack confidence, so long as you communicate it in a particular way. I'd love to come back to that if we have some more time, because I think how do you convey lack of confidence without it being career limiting is also a really big question. But let's press on here. Let's talk a little bit about sort of like this idea of performing communication or performing confidence, because I think it's tied to some of the points that you just made really recently. So, how do professionals kind of balance clarity and confidence without feeling like they're performing and being an inauthentic version of themselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. The inauthentic version of themselves is probably, to me, the complicating factor of the question, because I think the performing aspect, I would say, I think all communication is some level of performance. And I actually think, so let's stick on that for a second, and then maybe we can come back to authenticity. I think from a performing perspective, again, we talked about that kind of translating from thought into words, and what that is going to sound like and how it'll be received and what it'll be perceived as. Automatically, to do that translation, you need to clarify in your head, how will this be performed? And so I think, to lean into that, certainly earlier in your career, and over prepare in certain situations for how that will come across, and treat it a little bit like a performance, is a nice way to develop some of that muscle memory, so that when you are on the spot, some of that muscle memory is already there in terms of what your behavior is, how you're, carrying the conversation, how you're landing your key messages. Now, if we all did that and we all were performing, it would just be a world of robots. And so, from that aspect, I think this is where the authenticity piece comes in, is you also need to kind of gut check yourself with some reality, right? Is
Mm,
this somebody that I would want to listen to? Is this being conveyed in a way that is going to engage me and make confidence or give me clarity of what's being communicated? Those are some of those things that I think there's just a self-awareness and a realistic perspective on it that you need to check yourself on as you strike those. Um, but the performing piece is one that I still to this day will, for certain messages, find myself walking to the tube, recording myself of, okay, I'm going to have probably 2 minutes to land this message. How do I want to say it? And then I listen to it and I go, that didn't work. And then I try it again. That didn't work. And then 2 hours later, I find myself in the situation and I try and hopefully it resonates. But I've performed a couple times to kind of work through either what didn't work, what did, or even just to kind of re-exercise some of those muscles that maybe I hadn't been using for a little while.
Oh my goodness. I'm smiling because uh there's a couple of things about what you said that are really interesting. I want to zero in on. The first thing is how different perspectives can be. When I originally thought of this question for you, I did not think of performing as the positive thing. I thought performing communication or performing, put it in air quotes, confidence as sort of a negative thing, as something attached to inauthenticity. And upon just hearing your response, I'm realizing perform communication a lot too, right? Like, because to your point, depending on how you want something to land, you might need to do some rehearsing, right, in the background to say, yeah, no, if I say it like that, I don't think it's going to land the way that I intend to. Maybe I'll try it this way. Maybe I'll try it this way. It's actually a really key part of communication. So thank you for sharing that perspective as well, because it shifted my perspective as well on this idea of performing communication, something that I think for a lot of us who aim to be effective communicators comes pretty naturally. In fact, is imperative. But inauthenticity is something entirely different and distinct from that.
100%. And I think one of the things that clicked for me as I started thinking about finding the time and space to, I'll say, rehearse a little bit more on certain messages is the notion that when you write something, it's something like it takes 5 or 6 bad drafts to get to something that actually is good. Now, ChatGPT and others will change that, I'm sure. Um, but when you're talking about communicating verbally, in a different medium than writing, well, what's the difference, right? Let's go through a couple of bad drafts, reflect on what is that, how is it landing, and then try and land on your final draft. But again, not in a robotic way, in a way that will be with your own authentic self. And that just takes practice and failure and successes and feedback and all of that kind of self-reflection.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mike. I think this idea of authenticity and showing up as sort of like the fullness of yourself professionally, most preferably the best version of yourself in the workplace, is really interesting. And I think in sort of like the inclusion discourse and all of these things, it's become pretty clear what that means for people of color, black and brown people, people of different sexual orientation. But I do think that what's often left out of the conversation is like if someone is seen to be part of the dominant culture, we'll just call it like white male, what does that mean to them? What does authentically showing up to the workplace mean to them? I've never been part of that discourse. I'd be curious if you have a perspective on that.
I genuinely don't know that it fully changes from kind of race to race if I just leave it there, or from male to female. For me, showing up authentically and trying to bring that with your best self, the best version of yourself in a professional setting, is being able to meter how much of my personal mess, because we all have it, is going to come through. And so, what do I mean by that? If I come into work on a Wednesday and I've been up all night with one of my kids, my wife will laugh at this because she usually has to nudge me a little bit to get up. But if it's been a late night as a young parent, I am not going to be my best self the next day. Now, I could not talk about that at all. I could not want people knowing like I had a sick kid at home. Or I could not go into the details of what that involved and just say, hey, just to level set with everybody, I'm off today, right? Now, that's one small example, but I think that you could magnify that over lots of different things. Hey, my mom passed away recently. Hey, we're having really tough financial times at home. Hey, like something else that's bigger, that part of life that we all go through. are things that you can't fully ignore, because if you ignore them and just try and press on and bring your best self, A, I don't think you're bringing your best self, but B, people then start to see that this person's just trying to kind of put off a show. Like you can sense that. Now, at the same time, you don't want to kind of bring in all the mess because it is a professional setting. It is one that you're trying to maintain a long-term brand. You're trying to convey confidence. And so, depending on what those things are that are happening in your life, I think it's okay to acknowledge them, but to the right depth, right? And to a depth that isn't distracting. And so to me, that's kind of the balance of being your authentic self, bringing it into the professional space. Now, to drive right into your question, like as a white male, how have I thought about that? I do think there is an aspect of how do you measure that depth? And there's kind of a relatability aspect to that, right? Like me sharing parenting conundrums with someone who's not a parent, well, that's either going to just not resonate or go over their head. Just the same
Yeah.
as me sharing what kind of my problems might be with somebody from a different background whose set of problems are far different and far more vast is also an element of relatability that I should be trying to keep in mind. And so I
Mm,
don't think I've got a perfect answer to that, but for me, it's just trying to remind yourself of as I purport a personality here, how is that relating with other people around me so that we're not
mm.
uncomfortable with each other's authenticity?
Yeah, I can appreciate that nuance. There's this idea of sort of a shared human experience that can be brought to the workplace tactfully, carefully, but also with keeping in mind, right, other people's authenticity that they're bringing to the table as well. Thank you for that nuanced response. I can appreciate that, and it's got to be some complexity added when you're operating in like an international and cross-cultural environment, right? Which is what you're living day to day. And so if we can bring it back a little bit to sort of communication skills, um, how do you approach building those communication skills, with teams that are operating across all these different cultures?
Yeah. So definitely some funny moments will happen. For any Australian listeners listening, one of my first team meetings where I was doing a bit of a brainstorm with some people, I said, why don't we go doodle this on the whiteboard? And the word doodle in Australian slang means something far different than I scribble on the whiteboard. So things like that will come out. So um, one of the things though that I
Should we Google it? Is it Googleable or no? We should probably
sure,
stay away from
Googleable,
Googling.
just don't look at images. But but yeah, so one of the things I try to do is really create time and space for both practice and feedback. Um, so we have a standing meeting on one of my teams, and in a lot of the teams that I've been a part of, there's been a form of this in one format or another, where anyone, regardless of your role in the team, your hierarchy on the team, whatever that might be, from very senior level down to as junior as it gets, has the ability to capture the time and attention of the team. And so you can come and you can present an idea, you can provoke a brainstorming session. You can use that however you want. And while the input and the content of the actual discussion can be helpful, it's really more about at the end hearing feedback from people about how did it go in a non-judgment, everyone knows you're kind of in a practice setting environment. And it might be, hey, and we know that your objective here, what you were trying to optimize for, was pulling as many voices and perspectives in as possible. That didn't work because XYZ. Or, hey, really didn't understand what you were trying to sell us on there. You didn't give us enough context up front. And having those kind of opportunities to practice, to get the feedback and to refine. And so it goes a little bit to that kind of performance mindset, a little bit. I think as a leader, trying to make sure that kind of no matter how busy things are getting, you're finding opportunities to create space for that so everybody can lean into it. because at some point as a leader, you hope that you're able to help people advance on their own journey, which may be starting as a very junior, fresh out of university analyst. But the more muscle memory they can develop early, the quicker that they can become that high impact, bold voice in the room manager that is helping to lead that team as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like some of the things that you've mentioned there are pretty universal. They certainly happen to people who are earlier in their career, but such a great reminder for people who are further along as well. And so I want to squeeze in one last question here because I think everything that you mentioned prepares somebody for sort of high stakes strategic conversations that they might be having now or later in their career. And so it's certainly a great practice. Can you think of others that you've shared with your teams, a practice or another framework that you ensure um, that you use, excuse me, to ensure that communication stays clear and actionable, particularly in high stakes conversations?
Yeah. So another previous manager and mentor of mine here at Vanguard, Chris McIsaac, who leads our international division, another master communicator in every medium. Um, One thing that he said to me very early days of working together was context is king. And that is something that I tried to bring into my everyday approach, but I find myself more and more bringing it into the approach for my teams, and remind them that you might have some really clear, big thoughts in your head, but you got to remember that whoever you're talking to is coming from a different set of context, is coming from a different conversation, is coming from a different mental place than you are. So come
Yeah,
back, ground in the context, make sure everybody is in the same mind space to go where you want to go with the conversation. And if you can do that, you can continue to bring everybody along and optimize for what you want to optimize.
I love that, Mike. Thank you so much. I lied when I said I had one last question. One really, really, really quick one that if I can squeeze one last one in. If you could leave listeners with just one thought about communication growth and leadership, what would it be?
It's a great question. It's a journey. I think your voice, your authentic self will continue to evolve in life. And that means, too, that your communication style, your confidence, the words that you choose to rely on, the words that you choose to explore with, they're always going to evolve. And so I think it's a great place to continue to reflect on how are you communicating, how are you being perceived, and what are you trying to optimize for throughout your journey long term.
Absolutely. Mike, thank you so much for this insightful conversation. Where can listeners follow and find your work?
I'm trying to more and more put myself out there on LinkedIn because I find that I love reading from other colleagues' perspectives and articles and podcasts and other things like that. And so I think I'm now getting to the point that I'm trying to motivate myself to be a little bit more of a poster on LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with me there.
Excellent, Mike. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining Unmuted Voices and imparting your stories on all of us. This has been fantastic. We can't appreciate you more.
Thank you so much for having me, Aisha. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
You heard it here on Unmuted Voices. Mike Finnegan dropped some serious gems about communication tools we should have learned earlier in our careers. And I think so much of it is applicable to people who are just starting out, but certainly for those of us who are striving to be effective communicators day in and day out. So if today's conversation sparked something in you, a memory, a feeling, a glimmer of what's possible for you once you harness the power of your voice, I am so glad. Remember, your voice was never broken, it was waiting. And you don't have to unmute perfectly, just honestly. If you're ready to keep going, to keep learning, to keep unmuting, make sure you follow Unmuted Voices wherever you get your podcast, subscribe. And if you want more tips, tools, and conversations between the episodes, come find Unmuted Voices on our Instagram as well as our YouTube. If this episode felt like the friend you've been needing, share it with someone you trust. Sometimes just hearing, oh, I get it, is the first step towards finding your voice again. Until remember, as Mike said, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to lack confidence. In fact, it's a shared human experience and one that you can communicate with boldness and authenticity. As always, your voice belongs here. Talk soon.